Now, for more on Venezuela's bondholders meeting, I'm joined by Ray Zucaro, Chief Investment Officer at RVX Asset Management. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So as we heard, their creditors basically left the bondholders meeting with a lot of uncertainty. And then you also have the ratings agencies declaring Venezuela is in selective default. So how can the country go about restructuring at this point?
Well, the problem is what the government has said is they would like to restructure or refinance the debt, but they also said they're going to continue to pay for it, to continue paying the debt as it is. So from a bondholder perspective, we'd rather have them keep paying. Because of sanctions, we're not actually able to take new debt from the government of Venezuela, but we are able to continue to hold the debt that's been issued by the government, as well as the oil company. So at this point, given the fact that they said they're going to continue to pay, there's no restructuring to be had from a bondholder perspective.
Now, we saw that a number of bondholders didn't show up for the meeting. So in terms of recourse, what are creditors looking at options-wise?
Again, the government is going to continue to pay their debts. The only real recourse bondholders have is what's called acceleration. And what that means is when the government or the company, or PDVSA, the oil company, doesn't pay, you can say this debt is due immediately. However, given the government, they are trying to get every penny together to make sure that they're current on interest and principal. There's no real incentive for bondholders to do anything to accelerate the bonds at this time, because there's always the hope that your payments will be late but still come in. Because once all the debt is accelerated, all the entire debt complex becomes due and payable at the same time, and then you have one huge creditor pool.
Then what would you say are the economic consequences beyond Venezuela's borders as this crisis deepens?
The humanitarian crisis in Venezuela is really unprecedented. We, at RVX, the firm that I am the CIO at, we do have a global perspective, and the economic issues that Venezuela has really placed upon itself are unbelievable. You've seen a heavy migration out of Venezuela to its neighboring countries, to the United States, even as far as Canada and Australia. The economic impact from a social point of view will have repercussions across all of Latin America.
So then we know that there's already a shortage of basic goods, services, food, and access to medical care. Could this really get any worse? How is this impacting everyday Venezuelans?
Everyday Venezuelans, the government, again, because of economic mismanagement over the last 18 years, is at this point so strapped for cash that they're starving the imports of medicine, of food, of even maintenance of the one thing that Venezuelan does today is produce oil. And they've underinvested in the maintenance. So while oil prices have recently enjoyed a nice run-up, relatively high prices, Venezuela's production is actually falling. So they're not actually able to even take advantage of this recent uprise in prices. A continuation of this cash-strapped government will just continue to press heavily, mostly on the citizens. The government will continue to operate, business life for the average citizen is where it's really suffering.
And as you mentioned, as this oil-reliant nation, they have the mounting debts, skyrocketing inflation, among other issues. How do you see Venezuela then potentially turning things around?
Venezuela really has three creditors right now. They have the bondholder group, they have Russia and China. They, at some point, will need to negotiate with at least two of those creditors to push out the maturity schedule. From a bondholder perspective, I would like the bonds not to be impacted. If those bilateral creditors of those nations are willing to restructure the debt, Venezuela can muddle through. I mean, with production and with oil production as it is and oil prices where they are, they have enough money to continue to service the debt and repay one of the three main creditors. So, in the medium to short term, I see a muddle through as a best case scenario. How do you improve the Venezuelan situation in the long term? Frankly, it really goes back to the government. They have to adjust their economic policies. The imbalances that you see in the Venezuelan economy are unprecedented of what I see globally.
So then looking ahead, how do you see the situation unfolding? What should we be keeping an eye on?
Well, as your reporter in Venezuela said, they're in arrears on debt. If they get that the past due interest paid, if they've finally get all the payments that they're in arrears, if they get that cleaned up, if they can improve the oil situation. And frankly, what the wild card is, and the one that really concerns me, is if they call elections, I think there's a significant chance that the incumbent, President Maduro, could win re-election. And as a democratically elected government in Venezuela, it's going to cause a much different dynamic on the international playing field, and particularly with sanctions.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, Ray Zucaro, Chief Investment Officer at RVX Asset Management.